Everybody, welcome to the fifth and final day of the Daily Creative Challenge for Adobe Premiere Pro. Today, we'll be looking on how to spice up our footage a little bit, how to apply a vintage effect or how to emulate it for the edit we've been working on. Now, if you joined freshly, if you've missed the other streams, you can recap those challenges and lessons by going to behance.net/challenge/premiere, where you can see down below all the unlocked challenges, and you can simply, by clicking watch video, rewatch what we've already been through. You also have the option to join the chat community, where you can provide what you've been working on. Maybe we'll also take a look at some of the videos that have been posted there, and I will provide feedback for you, to you. And now, without further ado, since it's our final day, let's jump straight into Premiere and let's get started. This is not really where we left off today. I applied all the changes for myself that I would like to have. So I've went all over the grid, pretty much everything that I showed you yesterday, warming up the images, getting back the details from our shot. And today I want to show you two things. One is how to apply kind of a more filmic look to your video footage. And the other is how to actually create this vintage effect. We're not going for a realistic vintage effect, so we're not trying to create an exact VHS effect, but we're going for something that feels right. Okay, for the first thing I said, or the very first thing I'd like to do is I want to create an additional layer. I can do this by simply dragging what I have on my V3 on my third layer up. That's going to create another track. Another option I have is to right click on my tracks, and I might add another video track. If I want to add even more than that, I can select, instead of add track, add tracks. And this gives me the option to add video and audio tracks, which might be important if I would like to, for instance, add more sound effects down here or Foley, like if I would build a sound design. So I'm gonna drag this all up, and now I'm gonna take another adjustment layer. If you don't know how to create an adjustment layer, you basically just right click into your project panel, and then you select new item, where you have the option to create an adjustment layer. Now let's drag this on here. I could also drag the adjustment layer above everything else. We've already spoke about this. An adjustment layer basically is an invisible object with which you can, which basically, if you drag all the effects on, all the layers below are affected. Here on top, we have an adjustment layer that adds a little bit of movement to our footage. And above this, we have all the titles. Now, just so it doesn't get confusing, you can do the following. You can select your adjustment layer, and sorry if this was too quick, you can right click and rename it. For instance, this could be zoom in, camera movement, and this could be our zoom out or reveal. And if you'd like to have it even a little bit more intuitive, what you could do is to right click and select a label, and you can color it the way you would personally like it. So we could, for instance, select mango, and everything we color mango, for instance, might now be camera movement. I do not rigorously use color coding. I just use it the way it makes sense for me. I will sometimes use it to differentiate footage. Sometimes I will use it for the case like we do today. And I don't really apply any rules to that. Just use whatever works for you. Now, this one I'd like to call color grade, or we could call it color correction if you would, to actually correct some of our footage. And what I want to do now is to make our footage look a bit more cinematic, or if you don't want to use that word, filmic. One option you have is you can go to the Lumetri Color panel If you don't see that in Premiere, go to Window and select the Lumetri Color panel. Then you can go to the Creative tab and simply drag up. Excuse me, I've selected the wrong clip, I see. We have to select the adjustment layer, so that's important. And drag up the faded film slider. So what that does is basically it washes out our image a little bit. And this is very often perceived as a more filmic look. I do not go that route, but I do something different. I will instead go to curves. And just to give you a quick explanation of how the curves work. Up here, we have our highlights, our whites, excuse me. Down here, we have our blacks. So this part here is up here, and this part here is down here. So following that, here in the middle are our midtones. And if I manipulate this curve, I manipulate the tones. And by clicking on it, I can set points to manipulate really parts of the image. So for instance, up here are my whites, and here are my highlights. Here are, like I explained, the midtones, and here are my shadows. And to wash out my blacks, I'm gonna go down here and drag them a bit up until it looks the way that I personally like it, or what I'm actually going for when I have a reference image. The reason I like to use curves is because now I can actually adjust the shadows a bit more. I can either have a more smooth progression from the blacks to the shadows, or I can actually even drag the shadows down a bit to maybe create a more contrasty or moody look. But that's not really what I'm going for. It's rather something like this. And this is just one quick little thing you might add to your footage. I'm already going for the next thing already. So what I want to do now is I want to actually create this vintage effect that we've been speaking about. And I want this vintage effect to be in my midsection, which is here. I've just marked this with in and out points just for the sake of displaying it, demonstration. And I don't want to create another adjustment layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the C key, or what I also could do is select the razor tool and set a cut here and set a cut there. So the reason I will apply this vintage effect only to the middle part of my edit is that I want this first part be in the quote unquote real world, and this should rather be the realm of thoughts or maybe a memory, something like this. And I want to distinguish it by actually applying this vintage color grade. And back here, we are again back to the real world. So that's the idea. And now perfectly. So the first thing I will do normally is to look for an image that is balanced out and that will give me an idea of how much I apply the effects. This here, for instance, might be a too detailed shot to really see what all the effects that I apply and everything that I do, if it's actually working. So let's go to this image here where I have the talent, I have some landscape, there's really everything in it. And from here on out, let's work towards our effect. So the first thing I'd like to add for a vintage effect is I actually want to warm it up. Very often, if we think about old things like old photographs, they have this warm sepia or sepia look. Not sure what right pronunciation it is. We might go for 15, maybe even more than that, something like 25. Let's go with this. And now I actually want to take out a little bit of the contrast. So if I would go all the way up, this would actually feel like it almost sharpens the image, but I want the opposite. I want it to be smooth. I want it to be soft. So I will back off all the way here with my contrast. I think this looks nice, and I might play around with the shadows. If I actually want to slide them down or maybe up a little bit, I actually think up a little bit looks nice, but I want to reduce the highlights even like so. And the next thing I want to do is to actually take out saturation. If we were speaking about old things, they usually aren't perfectly saturated, but they might feel like there's a bit of color missing. They are not as vivid, especially when we're talking about memories. Memories can be vivid, but they're usually not as vividly as the reality is, right? And I don't want to do too much. Like 75 might feel a little bit gray and not too lively. So I'll rather go for something like 90, maybe 80, but I think rather 90, and I might even go up with the warmth, with the temperature to 30 here now. So the next thing we're going to do, and there are two ways to do this, like so often in life, there is not only one way to do it. One might be that I actually want to unsharpen my image, which is something that you will rarely do these days. But I actually found myself sometimes doing it when I find old footage that was shot on a standard profile and that has this digital sharpness. I sometimes will actually go and use this and unsharpen my image. So if I go all the way up here, you can see it's getting kind of blurry, but I might actually just drag it a little bit down to see what it does to my image. The other way I might go is to add the effect we've already been using over the past days quite a bit. It's the Gaussian blur. And here I'm going for a value like, of course, not 50, don't go overboard with it. But 50 is maybe a good example to show you what the repeat edges actually does. But what I'm going for is something like 1 or maybe 2. So you can see if I toggle off our layer, we're already moving in the right direction. If I toggle off the Gaussian blur, it's almost hard to see, but that's actually good. We don't want to see the quote unquote unsharpness or the blurriness consciously, but it should rather be subconsciously. The image should still look good, but it should also give off this effect that we're going for, this old nostalgia feeling effect. To enhance that, I want to add a vignette, which is something I normally would not very often use in video. And if I would use it, I would rather mask out an area and then play with my highlights and shadows. But in this case, we're definitely going for a vignette. And just to make you see what the vignette actually does is, a good way to see it is to use our feather slider and go all the way down. So now it's a very harsh vignette, but now I can actually see how dark it is, what it does, what happens if I manipulate our midpoint, and also what the roundness slider does. So we could, for instance, say that we're going for something like this. And now I'm going to feather it all the way out. This is what I personally like to do. So it's very subtle. You don't really see it again. You don't see it consciously, but it is still there and doing its job. The next effect I want to apply is chromatic aberration, which is actually a virtual reality and VR effect. I'm going to drag it on here, and you can see this is not really helping on the first look. So the first thing I want to do in our effects control panel is to unselect or deselect our auto VR properties. And what I usually do when I'm not really sure what an effect does or what I want to do with an effect is I will just go through the options. So for instance, here, I'm going to go to our frame layout and have a look at what looks best to me, just judging on the first impression. And I think this is kind of what might actually work for us. It still seems to be a bit much. So again, to see what it actually does, let's go overboard with it. And for that, I'm gonna, so what the chromatic aberration actually does is it's gonna split off the colors that we have. And if I go to fall of distance, I can see how much these colors will actually fall off from where they are actually centered normally. So we're going to do is just have a look at what happens if we go to a value like 50. So you can see now the colors are separating, splitting up and down. And now that we know what it does, we can back off a little bit and then see what happens if we go to very subtle values like -1. That's actually not doing much. So I might go for a value like 3 in this case. And now if I select it and unselect it, you can see it very, very subtly, but there is something happening. So we have a bit of distortion. We also added, and this is also what I used the chromatic aberrations effect for, we also added even more softness. And just to get a feeling for how it looks, let's render this section out here, because I'm quite sure now that we've applied color grading and some effects, it will not necessarily fluently play it through. So let's re-render this in Premiere. And meanwhile, I'll be taking a look who is already here, because I forgot to say hi, and I'm so sorry for that. I apologize. Cody, Tim, Z by HP, Bliss, hi you guys, Umakorn, Rick, hey, how are you? Megan, lovely to have you guys here. Purple Creeper, hi, hello. Kelly, hi. And we are almost pre-rendered. Did we have any questions so far? Doesn't look like it. Okay, then we are ready to move on. So now let's go full screen here and have a look at how we are. Slowly, but sometimes you might just get thrown into it. Moving forward. Okay. So this maybe might have been a bit much. I might back off a little bit here, just to get sure. So what we have now is we have a warmer image, we have a bit of distortion, we have a bit of softness, that works. But to really sell the effect, what we want to do is play a little bit with the frame rate. And we have an effect to actually do this, which is called posterize time. And we're gonna apply this actually not to our adjustment layer. So I almost did that. But if you apply chromatic aberration to a layer or to a clip, you have to be a bit careful. If you apply other effects to that layer, what sometimes might happen is that you run into a bit of an issue. A way to avoid that is to, for instance, have another adjustment layer, or just, for instance, drag this onto one of our clips, and we might copy that then. So what posterize time does, if I just render out those first two clips, you will see that once I applied it, it pretty much does nothing spectacular, like nothing. Come on, and here we go. Slowly, but sometimes you might just get thrown into it. And the reason it does nothing is because our frame rate is set to 24 frames, and the frame rate we're currently working in is, if I would go to sequence and sequence settings and check it, it's 23,976, so basically 24 frames. But what I can do now is I can emulate or simulate other frame rates here. So I, for instance, might go for 15 frames. And if we will have a look at it now, it will be a bit more choppy, which normally isn't something you would like to have. But if you're going for vintage footage or slowly, but sometimes you might just get thrown into it, or a nostalgia feel, this might actually work. So that was very subtle. Now, if we go for a value like 4 frames per second, you will definitely see what it actually does to your footage. It will be almost stop motion, basically. Slowly, but sometimes you might just get thrown in. That looks like it didn't render out. So 15 is a value I'd like to go with, but what might also sell it is, for instance, a value of 12 frames, which is something that was formerly, or in the old days, used for film. And like I said, this is not really accurate to a vintage or a VHS effect, but it's rather about the feeling. But sometimes you might just get thrown into it. Okay, and that definitely works for me. So if I like that, I might paste that also onto this clip. And basically you can copy and paste the clip by doing a right click and copy, or when you're working on the Mac, select Command and C, and then just, whoopsie, select all your other clips and put it in there. So normally too, because this week's theme or overarching theme has been story, I would do a little bit more, especially here at the end, where we from our memory time or the visit of our thoughts are going back to the realm of reality. But I do not necessarily, or we do not necessarily have time to go over it fully. We will go back to our final version that I've prepared and showed you on the first day and show you what I did here. So we are having here our vintage effect, and you can see if I scrub through this and go a little bit faster that basically we start here with the vintage effect still applied. And once we are here, we are going back to our regular grade. And what I did is, if we're going to the effects controls, I keyframed all my effects that I applied, and I'm basically going back to our standard value. So the idea behind it is I'm using the adjustment layer in our color grade to again enhance the story and tell or show this progression from the memory lane or our thoughts back into the quote unquote real world. So this is also a way how you can use, for instance, color grading or the adjustment layer and all the effects you apply to enhance your story. Okay, that was it for today. So far, I did not see any particular questions to these. If you have any, feel free to post them now. Other than that, we might actually take a look at one of the videos that was posted in Discord from Ashai. I hope I pronounced it correctly. There have also been other submissions here, everything super interesting to watch, and just to maybe also give you an idea how you can work this out. Part of this video is also footage that I provided. You'll find the starter pack in a link below the stream or the video, and you can work and play with it and really create your own unique edit. And Ashai did create something very different from what I did, but I think it's a quite lovely edit. So let's take a look at this. Go full screen here, all the way back, and let's watch this together. Come on.
The age-old human predicament. The longing to be more than what we are. Trapped in our self-created prisons. The turbulent mind offers glimpses of beyond. Afraid to let go of comfort. If we can only walk the path with commitment, a truly wonderful thing happens. We realize we were home all along.
Now, I think this is pretty nicely done. So not only did Ashai use all the footage that I provided and I personally did not necessarily use, but we also had intercutting there. So going back between different scenarios, going back between movement and then again still shots, going back between environment and talent shots, going from one place to another, arriving at a destination, then also having a script that tells another story, that does not only tell us what we see, but adds extra context. Well done. And we are nearing towards the end of our final day of the Daily Creative Challenge. It's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you all so much for joining in, and stick around. In half an hour, we will be back with another stream, which will be the daily creative challenge for Adobe Photoshop. I hope you had fun with it. And if you're joining in or if you're seeing this video after the stream ended, please feel free to still accept the challenge and go for it. If you post your videos to Discord, I will be glad to provide feedback. Thanks again, and I'm looking forward to see you again. Stick around for the next stream. See you. Bye-bye.